In 1917, South Carolina's African American leaders were at a turning point. Educated and ambitious, a new generation was emerging with the means to create a new way of life.
I think from the outset there was a great deal of hope and anticipation that the war might serve as a platform for advancing civil rights for African Americans in the state.
In South Carolina, the 371st Infantry embodied that hope. But like other attempts to attain equality, this one met with resistance.
I think the very idea of black men in uniform and black men armed was very much against the kind of large perception that many South Carolinians, white South Carolinians had of African Americans. W. Ball, a famous journalist, wrote in his diary that to hold arms was a man's profession, a white man's profession. And I think Governor Manning shared that idea that this would be a dangerous experiment to place African Americans in uniform and to arm them.
Governor Manning wasn't the only one with doubts.
If you look at the state newspaper in the summer of 1917, you will see news articles and editorials that call vociferously against the bringing of black troops to Camp Jackson, the black troops who became the 371st. And only later was there a sort of concession only if these individuals were from the South, and only if they were trained and led by white commanders who were from the South as well. And so the 371st emerges as this kind of interesting experiment of training former agricultural laborers, training former sharecroppers to now engage in military combat.
Russell Wolfe's cousin was a white officer with the newly forming 371st.
I became interested in the 371st right after the death of my father's first cousin, Benjamin Simmons, or Benny Simmons of Roseville, South Carolina. And upon his death, his widow gave me his unit's history, his some additional books, and his platoon leader's whistle. And I started reading about the unit, this 371st Infantry, and couldn't believe, what I was reading, and the fact that I'd never heard of them just really got me.
The story that Wolfe discovered was of a unit that fought with exceptional bravery, a unit that became a symbol of what African Americans could contribute, and also a story of how those achievements and those sacrifices would not be enough.
The story is that the 371st was this ragtag assembly of sharecroppers and farmers who were eager to come to Columbia to train, who came tattered, barefoot. And there well may be an element of that, because indeed that picture that emerges, I think, was probably a fair reflection of the poverty of which many of these men came from. Yet at the same time, the 371st included a number of very literate, professional men, accomplished people who came as a result of the Selective Service Act. Some were not sort of immediate volunteers. Many of them were called upon to serve and really had no choice in serving.
But it turned out these soldiers quickly adjusted to military life. And that's one thing you keep seeing time and time again, how adaptable, flexible these soldiers were, how well they took to training. And they eventually became supposedly the smartest dressed and drilled unit at Camp Jackson. And they were given accolades by the post commander and the people of Columbia, for this. The black citizens of Columbia, adopted this regiment. They made, the flag. The unit when it got there had no, regimental flag, and the black citizens of Columbia had the flag made.
At first, the Army didn't intend to send these men into battle, but the demand in France for troops and the confidence of the officers in their men put the 371st in the center of the action. Not allowed to fight alongside white Americans, they were reassigned to the French Army. Armed with weapons they hadn't trained to use, they faced tough fighting in the trenches.
They were stripped of all that, and they were trained as a French unit and reorganized as a French unit. So again, they were doubly, it looked like, doomed to failure but they again rose above that.
The 371st really saw combat at its most gruesome nature. They sustained extremely high casualties. They had over 1,000 of their troops killed, wounded, or missing. And in fact, they had over 100 of these men that were killed in active combat. This wasn't an easy regiment to be a part of, and they really did earn their full glory. That's why the French Army actually awarded the entire 371st Regiment the French Croix de Guerre for their service.
They were heroes even before they left to go to Europe because there was, again, these men were invested with a great deal of hope and anticipation and kind of faith. I mean, the assumption was that if these men proved to be successful, as most hoped they would be, that in turn the nation would respond by affording certain civil, political, economic rights that have been long denied.
Their bravery earned them a citywide welcome home.
No one could deny that they were quite honorable in their service and proved quite decisive in the French campaign against the Germans. And so there is in early February 1919 a mass parade in Columbia welcoming these men back to the city. There is the presence of the governor who's there. There is the presence of the leading African Americans there, including many who had some opposition to the war initially.
And so they acquitted themselves honorably and they returned the flag with honor, and I thought that was something very nice.